당연히 차상 안에 디기 두야다 동아세기 탑람가리에서나 예 안조지기 제시면 너비 차와세티마 탑람디기 디디레에서나 줄량 모두 지금 그래 지나다 저기 대화 중에 디기는 규단 kiến起来的 용거래 지나다 동아야의 규단 kiến来的 용거래 지상은 동아세야디 디 세야리아 동아야의 규단 kiến的 매바서 고고래 지래 지나다 대화 주변에 저기 대화야의 규단 kiến的 저기 배치신의 주고고래서 지나다 디기 주변에 대화야다 동아 주변에 규del래야 친의 치견 소소라소바다 랑이견 셈 삼나타항이 토네 림반이 용고레스 디자인자 당한준다 다시에도 조 셈긴 낭 셈르테네 아는 저기 동아 용다다 셈간에시 삼 가서 삼로 코와이나 동아 용고레 셈간에시 삼레바 당와이나 델레테네 가서 레티기 주고레스 지나 동아 용 규다 디기 용 규 낭 삼로 디기야 데네티니실이야 모데션 루스체네 모데는 거로와
Good morning. So we're continuing to look at Lama Atisha's Bodhisattvas jeweled garland. So the focus of this text is on how we can achieve happiness and overcome problems and difficulties. And the technique that Buddhism presents and Lama Atisha is presenting here is not to focus on changing our outer material conditions, but rather to change how we interact with our outer as well as our inner world, our outer conditions as well as our way of thinking. Change how we relate to our thoughts and our outer world. And this comes about in dependence on the recognition that the happiness that we desire is a result of causes that we ourselves need to accumulate, and the problems and difficulties that we long to be freed of. These too are a result, and therefore we should avoid accumulating such causes. So in Lama Atisha's text, he presents many jewels that bodhisattvas cultivate within their own continuum, and these are the jewels we too need to accumulate, because these jewels are the causes that lead to the attainment of happiness, as well as these causes grow ever stronger. The opposing minds, the afflictions, grow weaker. So this text here is a technique to achieve lasting, stable happiness through cultivating a number of good qualities within ourselves.
디기 주야나 동아 세야리아 지상아도 카레이네 레가로시 카레이네 아주 응위니 수디 약보지 하 먹어야나 니 이견진에 레가 넣어 먹고 차야다 제 지금 저기 수불에 패다 뇌에게 칼라리치기네 지금 응위니 수디 간시 핑거를 핑거 여바다 뉴브 난 뉴기 여바다 응위니에서 하 먹어도 나는 아주 칼라 다른 어디야 펭귄 디란 펭귄에 삼자사샤는 나가서 수불 네바 용거 봐도 세부착으로 디난시 아주 디기 주변당 동아 야에 규긴디기 삼로 코로나들이야 삼로 데네시 코바에는 아주 디기 주고래 삼로 데네시 코바에는 동아 주고에서 아주게 마신 배 견제네 나는 아주게 토네 동아 뭐 용을 빼는 아주 콩로스지 콩로스랑배네 아주게 디기 주변당 강하세야려 콩르디 베제 나제 안주기 망고 베시던 거와 소설이야 뇌비기세 삼삼나 남상 콩라제 될야 콩라라 아니 콜야 갑 직식수시야다 뇌비기야다 소수게 다디 가르치고서는 소수기 디기 주비에게 된다다 소소 강하게 매버서에게 된다를 지고로와 이나야 디기 준비에 될라 먼저 콩르 베제 땅에도 디기 준비에 될라 갈 야가 질리그래 강아 질리그래 야가 두가 질리그래라는 누가 지용야 라신이가라 동아시용 누가 용을 제가 저기 디기 주비에게 삼로 땅한기 배시 야고지 한 먹어 외견진에 되네게 노트 먹고 차고 되네 예자당 저기 상유점내 디기 안줄이야 두신에 삼로 땅한기 디기 주비에다 동아서 남제 상유점내 디기 송샤버디 배 개첨보 송셔 차사 삼로 땅한 토네 는 아주 디기를 동아서야 송거 제가 디 마 상유점내 송셔게 디기 파 먼저 닝보티기 수 뒤에네 뒤에는 지금 안직 된다 야chen 보지는 안 돼야 좋지기 저주심이 nervous 창화사 생각할 당하줄이야 삼나티 야가래 니두가래 텔레든 동아기르고 텔레든 디기두그래 세데 맞아 셈디 맞을이야 모르는 거로와
As we come to know ourselves better, understand the workings of our mind better, we come to see that everything that we do is motivated to achieve happiness. And accompanying this, in order to achieve happiness, we also try to overcome problems. This is our eternal focus, and it is not just for ourselves, but for others. Every thought and resulting physical and verbal activity comes from such a motivation. And when our way of thinking about something is not in accordance with the actual situation, it's not in accordance with reality, it's not in accordance with that actual situation, misunderstandings follow. And so many of the problems and difficulties we experience are exacerbated by the extent that we may misunderstand a situation. So we can think of situations from our own life where we've misunderstood what someone is saying or where they're coming from, and therefore upset has followed. We've become unhappy. And this has come about due to a misunderstanding. So this we know from our own situation. But when we dig deeper, we come to see that where the mind is afflicted, that mind is not in accordance with reality. That mind is misperceiving others as well as our own internal thoughts. When our mind, to the degree our mind is afflicted, it is misunderstanding what it is thinking about. And therefore, problem upon problem is experienced. In Buddha Shakyamuni's teachings, he's presented the path to come to understand reality, come to understand how phenomena exist, presented a path to overcome misunderstandings through understanding the actual situation. And in this way, we can engage with others, engage with our internal world in a way that is harmonious with the actual situation. And this ensures our mind stays calm and peaceful. We are able to act in a way that benefits others too. This technique to achieve lasting happiness, Lama Atisha has composed here this short text which comprising just a few words, but the meaning contained within here is deep and profound. And over time, hearing more teachings and reflecting ever more on it, this deep teaching this deep meaning will start to arise within us and transform our way of thinking.
가르슈 직송한 가르레스는 가지고 셴려 니베 삼바게야다 나게게야다 안직베 누스게되게 안직베 가브리엘야베 셈shum제 두스진 삼로 된지 코바나 디소 라신이가랴 니베게 안마오바나 니베게 규레 동아여야 규차고래 제산디네 인자당 아주리야 대화 삼로 간지 코고래라네 셴기 배낭아 저기 지한란 뇌베 삼라 쳬바에 디기 제부 가르리가 류마가 쳬방안 바테 디게 샤란 뇌 인데네라나 뇌바 용고래 데네 인자다 당을 삼라 가르던 거래서는 샤리아 잠제 삼다 따야다 류가 유스미고 나 샤란 뇌바 지금에 셈에 삼다 따야다 아니 샤리아 안지게 샤 셈제 간디시나 오랑게 파마 균링병 안에 개왕아마 파마먹고 제녀와랑을 진침벌에 셈베게 아니 셈제 대체 망방이 부어 제형을 제상한주 배 저와 타니고 인생비게 내게 삼다샬이야 또 삼당고 그래야지 아주 되네 나는 나야 기어도 되네 라미게 야깔로 나이 담가디게 잼바지야다 아니 지금 슌 세배당아 교를 상아 신금도 세배 되네게 셈 슌벌이야도 될이야 지금 야 소소게 제바지야 상 셈이야 로야 파야다 상되바 제고래서 가상한도 디고르마 디슈로아
The causes that we cultivate that lead to ongoing suffering or afflicted mind such as pride, such as harmful intent towards others, anger, attachment, or the mind becoming dispirited, despondent. And these lead to suffering for ourselves and through their expression suffering for others as well. And thus far we've also not just spoken about the minds that bring suffering and pain, but also the antidotes. The first step in cultivating the antidotes is to come to clearly recognize for oneself that the afflicted minds are harmful, that the afflicted minds are always harmful. And this is a crucial first step because it's independence on seeing these minds, these afflicted minds, as harmful. We will cultivate the strength of mind to transform our habits, our habitual ways of thinking. To the extent that we see individual or particular afflictions as only harmful, to the extent that that is vividly clear to us, we will cultivate the strength of mind to abandon them, the strength of mind to transform our habit patterns that we currently have, which are harmful. And come to see these habit patterns as nothing more than thought. And thought can be transformed, it can be changed. How to do so? Following that first step of recognizing the unwholesome minds as being always harmful, we start to cultivate the contrary minds, wholesome minds. And these we've looked at a number. And amongst those that we looked at yesterday were to consciously be aware of the good qualities in others, especially when one's mind is going in a negative stream, criticizing others, pointing out the faults of others. Turn our mind, transform our mind, focus on their good qualities, remind ourselves of their good qualities. And in this way, a sense of respect for them will arise. Remind ourselves of the kindness they've shown us, the benefit they've brought to us, directly and indirectly, this and previous lives. And again, our respect and appreciation for them will grow. And use this then as a basis to cultivate love and compassion for them. So this and others we looked at yesterday. Returning to the text. When objects of attraction or aversion appear, view them as you would illusions and apparitions.
Gabriela, Denis Tondo, Delia Chapaki, Udike, Deniki Tondo, Udike Nana, Gabriela, the Dick, Contracake, Udi Nayadu, Nakara Samtango de Labna, Deniki Udi Nangin, Deniki Udela, Denanga to Chapakiata, Dawaki Contracake, Ungorova, Deniki Ud Palo Nayadu, Karasamtangos, Gumegi, Gumajuba Nashin, some big some tango essere.
When objects of attraction or aversion appear, this we've looked at briefly previously. You recall every thought, every consciousness has an object. That object could be something from the material world, or it could be another thought. One thought thinking of another thought, such as a memory. So the object of consciousness could be something we see, could be something we hear or taste, so something from the material world, or the object of consciousness could be another consciousness, thinking about something. And from the object of consciousness, further consciousnesses arise. So when we're thinking of something, other consciousnesses, such as afflictions, like attachment and anger, follow.
And Jig Bene Medoro Shinakara, Bening to Hu, Jig Juba, Jig Gumigi, Gumakan Yipa, Juicing to Shu, Temba, Nazugi, and the Gumakan you Juice, but Shimba, Hako, Guhanti Yigi, Bening to Russia and be Chavajing Marwa, Chavajing Marcas called Guma, the Juba could imagine Duansha, Chimadon, Winis, Mare, Samurua, Chisa Chavajigo Mare. Dinashin, Gumakan you Juice and Be Jingazuki, Jig, Shanato, 배지게 ben에 저기 두루다 되네게 현아서 배 키로 소자가 이건 되네시 주시는 되시 요번에 뭐네서 유마 하고 간데 이게 가서 그래서 아이디데 주마래 띵아서 소ja가 말했어. 지금 현아가 지 말아. 지금 마게도 텔레오 콘로랑 말와 유마래 호 주배 주셔지 뭐연에서 말했은 거로 와. 지산디 소자요 수순여비게 뭐연에서도 말해 상야다. 인지와도 영원의 영원이 말해. 선배 삼명도 한델리아 차바지 말해 당화지 말해. 지금 규마시아 베디로와 디나심 아주 차다지 유도 통용도 당 저기 뭐연에서도 한 먹어지네 안 차바지다 당화지도 연구를 해지. 다 그런 그 유가래 신앙 뭐연에서도 간시오래 람나 또 지네 유단 진지를 뛰는 줍도마도 가서 나가도 가는 것은 유디 가는 것은 차바지 유디나 배 그런 랑궁에 가라마도 그런 뭐니 줍되게 쇼 야구침 받는 거래. 단여바지게 마가위 유도 당화지 유나와네 가라야마도 그런 랑궁에 줍되게 배 지게 미제비게 남바로 있는 거래. 되네 심주 제반에 되네 지요 말이지. 저선 가라야마도 봐요 말. 유단 진을 뛰는 줍 랑글로야 유만하지 나와 잠지마도 무인이슬도 심주제나 만서 나와 나시지 요 말해서 그러다. 제가 되네 인상 하고 되네 제바자 하고도 아니 그 될이야 차와지 말에 당와지 말해 제래.
So here now, Lam Atisha is advising us that all objects of thought, whether they're from the material world or internal thoughts that we are, other consciousnesses that we are thinking about, we should relate to them as being illusions or being magical illusions. So for example, if we see a beautiful flower, but we know that that flower has been conjured by a magician, so it's a magical illusion, we may enjoy the show, but we're not going to be attached to the beautiful flower in the same way as we would be to a beautiful flower that we believe not to be an illusion, we believe to be real, that we believe to exist in the way that it's appearing to our mind. To express it slightly differently, but with the illustration of an aggressive dog. Usually, if we're confronted with an aggressive dog, fear will arise within us. And this is because we perceive this aggressive dog to be real. In other words, to exist in the way that it appears to us. And it exists as a real dog that is actually aggressive, therefore fear arises. Whereas if we know that this dog does not exist in the way it's appearing to our mind, actually it's a magical illusion, no fear will arise. One will not be afraid of something we know has been conjured by a magician. So this is how we need to relate to all phenomena. Because how we currently relate to phenomena is not in accordance with reality. We don't relate to phenomena as in a way that is in accordance with the actual situation. So again, phenomena refers to the objects of the material world that come through our five senses or through our sixth sense of our mental consciousness. So consciousness. Objects of consciousness. These we relate to in a way that they do not actually exist. We relate to them in a way that is not in accordance with reality. When we've reflected well on first how the phenomenon appears and then investigated whether it exists in the way that it appears or not, we see that it doesn't exist in this way. And therefore we realize it is no different from a magical illusion that appears so real when we know it is not. And then when we realize that whatever our object of thought is, it does not exist in the way that it appears, it is no different from a magical illusion, attachment towards it won't arise, because there is nothing to be attached to. Similarly, fear for it will not arise.
왜냐하면 저기 때문에 방어 타요로 하더니 저기 규마트엔제 배 가시기 지능 보수 오지케제 안지 직하는 마도 루시마 차산마 루시아 통도와 나디기 되니기 다 주메이바 내서 하고 건지다 Zuma Guni Maria somebody because Hamohan is Guna Hamo Miniro, Nigi, Demon Nigam Dagorwa. Got Zuma in Bahago can quote Denigi, Jetan Tixidua, the Hagoan Digi, Cousin, Kolia Toa Skayama Sharaged, did quote Denidi Chigorko Jenaro Chasa, did and Belamsa Hagurwa. That you need Dene Hamohanji, you need to Hamohanji, Carson Morrison, teaching Bojikana Maju, Kolia Toa Shuji, the Kanisina cook. Denmark Miba get Masugi, Denmark Ludi, and Jiggy Nalo, draw Nalo, Macha, Yuma, the Masugi, Sapigi, Tohala, Shusham Shugorova. The Gasan Dinitu, the winner, teaching winner, Jew to some Gorvada. Cokas in the Hamo, when is a Hamo, winner, Jew to some Gorda. Jim winner, the Matsuba, the Masugua, and as Dangrua, which is unquestioned some winner, I teach my Jew to spare some Jid and call it Hoa, the Kansas Ligorova. Zuma Mahawandigi, call so as Kayama, Zuma did because some big cotton is similar Chagorwa. Chazan Dina, she Mahazolia, Uji Kanish now and now do Gabla, and you check, you know, you can't have more running when you trubash now, none could actually. Chazan Dinig now and I shinching out the meal, Mahazolia, you meal now and I shinching. When you saw your Veslam, did Humana shinching witness to your mares. Chizan Dineza, Dinig now and I witness to Cheba Chedus, and now and I witness to the Mutinawa, witness to Mutumba, how go and Tikela, and you can now and Chava Kigo, Chavaki, that Tawa Kigo, Marichere. Then I also get this Hamo and now I think when you're Lola now and I the Harampa to do some later, Delia Chava Ligores, Chazadi, Humana Shin Mato, the Nigmares or Betisha.
So if you recall when you've been to a magical show and you've seen these astounding feats before one, getting caught up in the excitement of the moment, believing that what one sees, we really get quite caught up. Many feelings arise. Perhaps if something dangerous is being done, maybe a long sword is being swallowed, then fear arises. Are we going to see something awful? Is this going to be the time it goes wrong and the person dies? So we have experience of this. But if we with a companion who is perhaps skilled in the magical arts, they will also be watching the same show, but they'll be relating it to it very differently. They'll understand what's going on. So between the two of us, we are believing that what appears to us is in accordance with reality. What appears to us appears to be true. In other words, the way it appears to our mind is how it exists in reality. That sword is a real sword, and this is an amazingly dangerous feat, is what we'll be thinking. But our friend next to us, who's skilled in the magical arts, will know all the tricks that are being done, and they will be seeing the same thing, but they'll be relating to it very differently. They will not be responding in the same emotional way that we are, because they are not being deceived by what appears to them. They recognize what is appearing to their mind is not in accordance with reality. They know it is a trick. So now we take that illustration and we apply it to every object of consciousness, everything we're thinking about. Every object of thought appears to us in a particular way. It appears to us, the way that it appears to us is how it exists, is what we believe. Just like the magical trick, we believe it to be real, hence we are caught up in it. We may have a voice in the back of the head saying, possibly not, but we are caught up in it, as if it's true. Likewise, everything that we see or hear or think about, the way it appears to our mind is how we believe it exists. We believe it exists in a way that is not dependent on anything else, that is not influenced by anything at all, but rather it exists from its own side, by its own nature. When in reality, its existence in dependence on causes and conditions does not exist at all in the way that it appears. And to the extent that one comes to realize this, then everything that appears to our mind will know doesn't exist in the way that it appears. It's like an illusion, and therefore, attachment for it won't arise. Anger in regard to it won't arise, because we'll know it is no different from a magical trick.
And
the text continues, when you hear unpleasant words, view them as like an echo.
Daksha labna nga jugi dha chimpu yosade da denege jik pani dha chimpu chuban nga ju de de che pani ba wai laba ne pani su wai sa de gu re ji di ga de sana nga ju ge ge ba de dha de pa chin che dha de la dab che pani su dha de ji yung go re ma do pani mi ji nga ju wai la ge ge de pani mi ngoi ne la de che pani su ngoi ne la mi ji ge wai ji ge 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 de bes ne di ma ngoi ne su ngoi ma re 제상아서 삼나가서 와에 랍디 편이 다 편이 수리 다 와에서 벽이지 잡아도 고고로 와서 이내 돈달라 편이 미치기가 또 깨개고로서 근데 말해서 아니 가래라는 나 주게 깨개버데 다데 파치 편이 다들 답지 수로제 나도 고고레스 제상 나 주게 두스타 제상 자차레스 제상 벽이 응외인의 수 미치기 응외인에라 되신 편수에 라구오 말레스 제상 나서 나와라 페디스 라구오 바르 나와로래야 되네 통고르데 내디 말레스 제상 자차레스 디나시 아주 미니 비치 다가서 자샤세디 페니스 응외인의 수 많이 받다디 수고해야디 페니 미치기 깨개봉 응외네 많이 받지 하고 그러와 디나시 미니 비치기가 아주 암출로 거여도 랑게 왕래 나와 좀 마도 무인니술라 미니 비치디 마즈레 녀비기에게 되니 나와 나신지 가즈레 야 나위 셰바 나와 나신지 아니 용고 말해지래 두 삼다바이네 되네 미니 비치고바이네 될이야 아니 셈마기바다 될이야 콘트게디 용고 말해지래
The illustration is different, but the process, the thought process is similar to what we've just covered. So we know from our experience, when people talk to us in an unpleasant way, our mind becomes unhappy. Or if we hear sound that's really irritating and annoying, we become irritated and annoyed. Similarly, if we hear sound that's beautiful, attachment arises. So the way to relate to this similar is the same as before, but the illustration here is that of an echo. So we know from being in perhaps a deep ravine or a cave, if we shout something out, we'll hear it back. If we shout out a greeting, we will be greeted in return. But we know that there's not someone on the other side of the ravine or elsewhere in the cave that is repeating our greeting back to us. So there we recognize that there is not another person, that the sound is not coming a repeated greeting back to us. So we take the same understanding that sound too doesn't exist in the way that it appears to us. Because if we look for any truly or inherently existent sound, we won't find it in the mouth of the speaker, or we won't find it in the ear of the hearer, or anywhere in between. We come to see that whilst sound that comes to us, so whether the sound we then label meaning onto, in other words it's speech, or whether it's just sound, it does not exist in the way that appears as something true and real, but rather it's something that has come about in dependence on causes and conditions, as well as imputation by mind. Therefore it's not real. It doesn't exist as a real thing like it appears to us. There is no inherent nature within it. There is no natural existence to be found. There's nothing there that is suitable for attachment or anger to arise towards. When you realize that is no different from an echo. Our afflictions won't arise in response to speech or sound.
다 되네게 다 최 간데치네 규만나시 랑게 나와나 나신 위인이 줄에 된지 여러베스네 자오이니 요 말해지래 지산 딩안 쪽에 하고 해도 빼갈 하고래 지산 당하도 낭배기 따위 나네 따와 다 조로 지래다 아 저기 하고 해야겠다 되네게 나와 나신 위인이 수 미튼 바 하고 해야 돼 하고 일로데 따와데 조 최고래 지산 디 ngazo ge chesho de chagwa je nang bi ne tawi na ne chizna deni inza ndi ya shimju chelia chigi ne deni ma jeba chin jeba che sam mongbu tang dusma da lamsang ngazo ge hago de yadi kale hago chagwa wa
What I've presented thus far, if you're hearing it for the first time, it's difficult to understand. It's difficult to understand that everything we think about, whether it's something we're seeing, hearing, or perhaps a memory we are recalling, or future plans we're thinking about, none of these exist in the way that they appear. Because we aren't even really that aware of how things appear to us. This is not something we generally think about. To understand this topic well, one needs to study Buddhist philosophy and reflect on it deeply over a sustained period. And in this way, one does come to recognize how phenomena appear to us, and then we come to recognize that they do not actually exist in this way. And this is when we come to truly recognize that phenomena are like illusions.
Bine duchen tolya tachi cheken centripa kebadigi ne denike dade yarum-chigi centripa nyamdo kalu mangbo na sungdo yarum-chigi sungdo centripa keba kashigi ku duchen digi du shimji soso nawa na shinji pa nawa lole nawa na shin duchen pa jebachi do denike jebachi de nye gyune ragi mendos 제가 윤에 니에라고 동상으로 차르고 니에라고 얘기 mendos 제가 되게 나와나 신칭할 줄로 나와나 두세 바진 제 얘기 mendos 두테나 얘기 mendos 송으로와 디나지다 두테나 니 지바랑 아주 쉐간데시네 아주 셈나이네 제가 소소리아 나와나 신줄로 나와나 신치 나신 짐주체네 제바체바나 로라 나와나 신치 자와기는 요 말에서 그래.
For some decades, His Holiness and those around him have been interacting with many scientists, many in the scientific community, and they're investigating how particles exist. And His Holiness has been encouraging them to seek how a particle exists, come to try and find the smallest, tiniest particle. And what science is coming to see, that smallest, tiniest particle cannot be found. So this is now encompassing quantum physics and other areas. But science, or these scientists are coming to recognize that there is no natural existence to even the tiniest of particles. There is nothing to be found that is inherent to even the tiniest of particles, let alone to a collection of them. So taking the similar technique, but applying it to our consciousness, bearing in mind that it's independence on consciousness that we will experience lasting or attain lasting happiness. Apply this technique to our consciousness and come to see how objects appear to us. And then, do objects exist in the way they appear to our consciousness? And as one investigates, one will repeatedly come to see that no object has its own inherent basis. Nothing exists independently.
Many measured Madana Tungoma, Tungoma to the Chuchima. The Duce Message Jabnet Tayon, that the Cheta says Tungora again. Tangan the Galos, many Dutain do's. Lagor, did you order the many you only do Lavana Yorde? In another Miglia share the Karisha wasn't Cheta Shadure. 아주 미나라 샤와나 하신 체중 체디 미니다가 여러 배선 자위는 요말 거니 먼저 미리 샤두게 숙디 첨보를 줘래 먹이도 충충을 거니 배다시라게 켜봐요래 대상 아주 메셔 따정 아주 미리야 따도 샤두비 갑라 숙디다 매경의니 숙니버디 체중 찍고 여러 배선 체중 찍고 뛰네요 말에 진짜 이내랑 아주 미니 수도 미니 여바다 하고 두고 진짜 데니기 아주 왜 미스미라 나외고 숙 체중이다 미니외니 숙 체중이디 딱다 나와나시 여러 배선에 자위는 요 말에 제가 데니게 삼다외는 아주 제상 아주 유간에 나외네 데니신 물론 나와나신디다 평외니 수이 직바데 차고 말에 나와네 아주 그걸 나와나시지 매도 제상 아주 나와나신데 다라 레샤 삼바네 데니 노트 차고래 제와
Perhaps earlier when at school, or certainly we know it happens in laboratories all over the world every day, scientists are looking at particles and looking for smaller and smaller particles. And when they use a microscope, and again I'm sure all of you have experience of this, suddenly you see things that you couldn't see before. And there's some excitement that now we have seen something that before was hidden to us. And we say, oh, I've seen this tiny particle. But what appears to our mind is not what that tiny particle is. For a start, it appears a lot larger than it is. So the way it's appearing to our consciousness, because it is appearing independent on the microscope, is not how it exists at all.
제바체 세디 상예기 점된디게 손제비 최디게 우이 내수등 안줄 다 다디디 소이등 안줄 우이 내수디 나와나 신우이니서 한모고 위견지는 안줄 노트 먹고 쉬어 지금 우이 내수디 신고의 계침부리에 사 되네자 상예기 최디 대진 저주와 현실을 뛰는주고 지산도 지리 심죽체에 당보 심죽체 제바체 진짜 제바체도 금세 양하다고 두미도 두 제바체도 되는 거인에서도 하고 두그래서 지산 거인에서도 하고 봐나 되네 녀모바게디 마가투고 그래 지산 안 되네 녀모바 차산 되샤세디 거인에서 하고요도 되샤데 방투고 그래 되네 되샤당 홍도 방이데 되네 띵이 대화디 토투고 그래 띵이 동아 자완균 동아 매바디 쇠투고 그래 지와 지난 되네기 제바제도 진에 하고 러들라 동반이 또 로셔야 되는 거죠 디서 동반이 세야디 유랑게 나와 나신 마주바들 동바시고라 동바 나와 나신 유베디기 매반서 동바 니네서 하고 그걸러들라 동니 또 로시고라 지난 디 동반이 또 로디 당아주 녀모바 차사 바에 자완이 매바 쇠기 면보디 디리다 제가 디게 될래는 아주 녀모바 차사 자완이 매바 쇠투고 그래서 제가 산지고 와토비 토에 디니 톱투고 타바야 디니 톱투고 그래지래
To tie a few points that have come up thus far, to tie these together then. We know from our own experience that when we don't understand a situation correctly, many mistakes come. When there's a misunderstanding, we encounter problems. So this we know. What Buddha Shakyamuni, though, is presenting is that he takes that principle and applies it to everything that we perceive. Whether we perceive through our senses, our physical senses, or an object of thought. Everything that we perceive, we believe that it exists in the way that it appears to our mind, the way that we are thinking about it. But Buddha Shakyamuni has presented, actually, this is a misunderstanding. Nothing appears to us in the way that it exists. And because of this misunderstanding, just like a misunderstanding between two friends, because of this misunderstanding, we suffer, we make mistakes, we accumulate causes that will lead to suffering. And it's through, and just like again in our daily life, when we eliminate a misunderstanding, then there can be harmony again. When we come, what Buddha Shakyamuni has presented is that when we come to understand reality and the way we interact with the world and ourselves is in accordance with reality, we will not make these same mistakes again. So here, one develops an understanding that is in accordance with reality. And here one understands firstly how phenomena appear, and then that they do not exist in this way. One recognizes that they are empty of existing in the way they appear. They are empty of any natural existence or true existence. And this understanding of emptiness, when it's developed deeply, becomes a wisdom realizing emptiness. And this is the wisdom that realizes how phenomena exist in reality. And therefore this is a wisdom that is in accordance with reality. And to the extent that one has realized emptiness and one lives one's life in accordance with this realization of emptiness, one will not be misunderstanding reality anymore. One will not be misunderstanding situations. One will not be living our life with this level of misunderstanding. Therefore, the afflictions will not be arising to the same extent as before. And when our wisdom realizing emptiness is profound, that wisdom is very powerful, we will be able to eradicate our afflictions. Because this wisdom, this particular wisdom, is the actual antidote to all our afflictions. And through cultivating it, we are able to eradicate our afflictions, live in accordance with reality, never having afflictions arise. We never suffer. We experience no unwanted circumstances, no pain, no misery at all. Rather, we abide in lasting, stable happiness. Lasting, stable happiness, freedom from suffering, liberation from suffering, comes about in dependence on cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness. Then the next two lines. When injuries afflict your body, see them as the fruits of past misdeeds.
나 데네기 다소수기 류리 최된 원고체 최된 체바다 데네 류리 나자주디 menju에 가서 제네 데네기 진지 자야 균에 매디간다 지게 나제들 균에 자야 매디 나제 데네 연구로 와 데네 연도 갑라 나가서 갈라서 아데 다냐리야 나제 데네 준 자야 민도도 진데 삼나다도 진 삼야 강아몽 부티기레스 진짜 셈리야 베 셈리야 남자당 이게 마기바 망고 여바네 디 견제는 아주 소부교체는 낮에도 두고 그러마도 낮에디 핑 말했어 야비 낮에 매봐서야 핑 말했어 지난 데니게 삼로 당겨 말했어 베네 맨주 원고체 맨주체 가제 제베나 자야 매딩 낮에 주베네 베 셈마기바제 부스토고 체지겨 말했어 디게 느기레스 삼로 데니시 코마 다델야 삼마 가르당 고르람나 당이디 두스네 나스 주해디 개왕아마게 레기 데우레스 타고 규사 사회질 데버지 용그레스 지사 고 데데 셈제 제화스 가임당에 셈제 제나 고 규사네 데우주반자 셈제 제네 메바스 차투야 가임도 제상 고 개왕아메가 고 레기 데우레 삼고레스 두 삼다베네 데네야 셈리야 회시시르자 셈리야 강아들이 말레스 제사 데네인자 셈리야 회시시치네 데네 셈 두스차기레스 제사 데네인자 류르네바 중외체 원길리에서 다와 자세지 온두순고르와
It's important that in order to make the most of this precious life we have, we live a healthy life, exercise well, eat appropriately, and when we're ill, we should go to a doctor, go to a skilled doctor and follow their advice. But we shouldn't only take care of our body, especially at the time of illness. We also then, in addition to following medical advice, need to take care of our mind. It's all too common, though, when one is ill, even with a minor illness, that one will worry and become anxious. And if it's a minor illness, maybe one won't be worrying about one's life, but about the impact it has on our daily activities. Will we be able to fulfill all our responsibilities and so forth? But worrying about our illness, whether minor or slight, doesn't help at all. We do not heal from worrying. No matter how anxious we may be, this will not lead to us getting better. Every doctor will tell you, in fact, it will make your situation worse. So here, we need to turn our mind to the Dharma. Remind ourselves that this illness that we are experiencing now hasn't just appeared. It may appear to us as if it's just come from nothing, but that is a mistake, that is an illusion. It has come about in dependence on karma. Previously, in a previous life, negative karma was accumulated, and that now is ripening. That's all. This is the ripening effect of negative karma that we accumulated. Maybe unwanted, sure, but worrying about it isn't going to stop this ripening process. But recognizing the actual situation will give us some courage, some strength of mind, because we can relate to our situation in accordance with reality.
Dela ju migewa le nyamdu migewa nyamdu yele gewa da migewa nigi thone juptige chagore gewa janjangi gewa jangbal jupde baina ngazu lüdele nasa yoya da kanga the gine yo mare sisda ngazu lüdi gewa nyama gewa ngame gewa sabale dene jubare de ine dikudele migewa ya nyamdu le chan nyamdu chen juptige chagore dene ngazu lüdi dukten seore sisa dukten le delia dunga da yoya dunga tikabri dewa yona ya namsa gyuwa ta ji dunga yoya ki ko lü tene tele yungor wa sisa dene za lü khoran la ko gyu nyom pa la tene ki ti ko kewa inza dunga yoya tikidi na ngazo dunga meba kyune cha ya meba re sisa dunga yungore sisa da ngazo lü de nyom pa tene ganis tugu do lamna ngazo kewa tene jubadi kewa ngazo mi lü thoba kewa ngami ki 류가 예수 예제도 수름 송백에 니기 되고 차고래 데라게 규데라 안에 동아 미가와 간다스 녀모바 간다스 요래람나 나주 류디 줍디 간스 주베스네 아미게 조가나 주바래 아미 조가나로 줍디 간스 주고라스네 바바다 아마니 펜신 착성계 제 착바계 바래 아빠외다 아마니 펜신 착바계 된 치바제 그 듬바차 데라 착바 티베게 대화데라 차차 착바계 데네 착바계네 파만니 념도 좋아라 데네 안 파만니게 류네 듀텐게 주 주제 안 듀텐 바주 안 데라데네 안 듀텐이 야체체 샤시는 거 수부 차서로 봐 제상 안 수부 규데라 파메기 아니 파만니게 착섬게 착비게 규야일래 되어래 제상 안 디멘비게 개왕아마게 안 줄래데 용거래 진짜 디네자 안 주고 류디 규래 녀모버여 되래 제가 녀모버여 되면서 마줄리데 텔이야 나슬레야다 동말레야다 요하게 되고 이거 용거래
We're all sitting here together as a group of human beings. As human beings, we know that this rebirth has come about in dependence on karma, and that karma is virtuous karma. When virtuous karma ripens, it leads to rebirth in a upper migration. When non-virtuous karma ripens, it leads to rebirth in one of the suffering lower realms, such as the animal realm. But the karma that led to us having this rebirth was tainted with afflictions. It wasn't pure virtue. It certainly was a virtuous karmic imprint, but it was nevertheless tainted with afflictions. Those who have a rebirth from pure virtuous karma, they will never experience illness because the karmic seed was purely virtuous. Whereas for ourselves as ordinary beings, whilst we attain this rebirth, independence on ethical restraint, so this is virtuous karma that led to this virtuous rebirth, affliction still played a role. And the role was when we were conceived, our parents slept together, and they slept together due to an affliction of attachment. So therefore, in our role of conception, there was our virtuous imprint of ethical restraint, and there was an afflicted imprint from attachment. These two brought about our conception and our later birth. So therefore, there is our rebirth not having come from pure virtuous karma, but also being tainted by an affliction, means that this body is a basis upon which we experience suffering. Hence, illness comes.
장슈 셈곰 장슈 셈귤레게 두체네 데네 다디 셰바나죠 동방이 또 별로세로 곰도 체네 데네 곰네 장슈 셈바 파과세야지 고판지 토바이나 니기 냠랭기 톱기 가서 류규 규르고 왔다 류도 규르체 류규체네 장슈 셈바 파과 차송바이나 똑바디 토바이나 데네 가서 류들에 나지경 하긴 마 갱고 차요 야말 나세대말 류 뚝제 짐바다 근데 지게 제베네 나세다요 말 류징가 나지야게 게투고래 지기고르제 제산 냠랭기 톱기 장주셈 냠랭제 되니 동방이 톱이 냠랭제 되니 밥에 가서 동용 옷은 또 밥에 가서 차는데 장주셈 밥아서지 고방 토바이나 되니 류디 아니 두긴 많이 받아서 그걸 류규소 냠랭도 규소 나세다요 말이시래.
The reason we therefore experience suffering is because whilst this rebirth has been attained as a ripening effect of virtuous karma that we accumulated, attachment though, or an affliction, still played a role or had an impact on this rebirth. Therefore, our body is the basis upon which suffering will and is experienced. However, even in this life, such a situation can still be transformed. And it can be transformed through training extremely well in the teachings that have been presented thus far and the techniques that have been presented thus far. In particular, through developing the bodhisattva jewels of love and compassion to the extent that one generates actual bodhicitta and becomes a bodhisattva, and doing that in conjunction with meditating on emptiness to the point where one realizes emptiness directly, so that one has a direct realization of emptiness, and therefore, as a bodhisattva, one becomes an Arya bodhisattva. Arya bodhisattva, being a bodhisattva, has realized emptiness directly. Through that process of the power of bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness, one's body transforms, and one then has a body that will no longer age or experience illness.
Dene Veta Gombar Rabnishing Rida Shivi Roshindu Dage Dani Panjashins.
The text continues. Dwell in complete solitude in an isolated place, like the carcass of a wild animal, hide yourself away in the forest.
Veta Gomba Rabnishes the Veta Lamne Embassy or near Emba, Gomba the Chiba, Padni Emba Paj, Gombalpa, Tanga to Yamlin Chibi Kabla, Tanga to get Sim that the Madu and Tanga the Le Dampo and Yamlin Dampo goes to the Jabaina. And the Chigi Mimongo Yosa, Sangazi Yosa Dubaina, and the Yamlin, Namian Shorts, and Yamlin, the Yawali, 2 Mares, and Denigi, Aji, 유 제네스다 지다 말 미글 통야다 되네게 닝지 버 먹고 되는 될이야 작바지 디용야 주비야 된다려 양질이야 먹고 쳐야다 양지 미년비 치다 강하데 되네 먹고야 디견저 콘롤하야다 되네게 뇽모베게 차고레스 지네 되네 인자 되네게 종레파 타링신네 엠바 되네실이야 안지그 도스네 되게 냠네 지고레스 왜다 권배 랍네 신사스티스 디시고레
Here we are being encouraged again, recognizing that we are still beginners, and therefore the distraction of daily life impedes our spiritual development. So we encourage you to rather retreat to solitude, because in solitude, away from the busyness of society, away from all distractions, in particular those that attract us, these are the objects of attachment, retreating to solitude becomes much easier to develop powerful minds of Dharma within us.
Di chöche wala ne embale dine nyamnen chebane chöche ala chöche ya ko hya ra go di nganzu le dos nyamnyo yo re nyama nganzu gombal de kabla ya jagya yo mare phon dai ba Tibetan yo ma ka ko shi thos yo ma da gomba na ling na de chilon ja zho go ma zho chu ma wa gomba na de da di samman de gar yo re sene chöge nyamle lobjong jehegi chöge tono lobjong jehedi samman ma de shanda jehegi di jeodo se be samlo kogo ma shayo ma da nan denege sosuge da lobjong ra sa di chöge tono ja rang ma do shara sam kogo ma ba nan diansang jibene pe jige da ji ja ya bo thwe an ji me denege ji ja ya na le da ya mo bo ye de ga an ji chi pa so dian sa da zhuo de wo pa so nam zhuo da ji da denege tono zhuo de wo de da ji an ji kap zha de mong le de denege tono nam yan shuo ya dang an ji denege an ji la bo mi jie la ba shuo ya mong bu yong guo le ba ji zan denege zang ko denege ga yang guo ya ro shi ni so ga ya guo me na de le jie de ko gang sun xue jie ga yu le ba zang lobjong di jie ga le ba zang da sam di ma de da xia ya ma de di gang tu tu jie de sam li guo ba ji zan ni en ba le de ba na di ko denege yu ba de se bu la cha gu du
Just to say first as an aside, the word for an isolated place or solitude is also the same word for monastery. So now to what Genna said. So here now, reflecting on the situation I had when I was living in Sera, in my monastery, there was no television at all. It was before the days of wide access of internet, so we had no internet, we had no TV. It was also difficult to move around. We lived in quite an isolated place. To physically move out of this isolated place was not easy. All we had were our studies. Therefore, everything we spoke about, everything we read, was what we were studying about. So therefore, what dominated our thought process was the topic that we were studying. Made it much easier to deeply integrate the Dharma within oneself, because this is what dominated us. It's what came to us through our senses. It's what stayed dominant in our mind. These days, the situation is much more inclined to the ready arisal of distraction. Internet is available everywhere, including in most isolated places. There is ease of travel. It's easy to now go outside of a monastery. So therefore, especially for those whom are beginners, it's much easier to get caught up in distraction. And then even when they are attending teachings or on the debate courtyard, their mind is much more likely, or there's much more of a potential for the mind to be caught up in worldly, mundane affairs, rather than abiding on the Dharma.
Rida shiwi röshin sayade, rida sayade shingna gilba chik de ko nazi tangji pa shiro chido ko pa chik mi lamga da diwa madun bache ko kugyo na diwa chik diwa pa chik diwa chine 시긴서라 시경도 되고 리다가 로딩한테 뒤와 제라 통하여 용거 말이야 지다 통거 말이야 지다 가서 그 리다 코바 내바치듯 다 람가디와 지금 이게 답네 쇠바다 내서 가가로 디 멤비 그런 내바체도 제대로 콜바 지게 샨다게 마통설 바지 술술 바지 콜 쿠교디와 바로는 딘마시 시고로 봐 시디시디 근데 리다가 로디게 제라 아주 통하여 막 그런 게 바 쿠교를 봐 되신 두스는 시고로 안디나시 아 주네 소소소기 다니 바자신스 소소라랑기 아니 소소라랑 남의 제사당 아니 저게 차당 제사기 유 되네게 삼마나 디철바 아니 추이 입제네 엠바나 네 엠발 되바나 다 디철마다 배바나 지바저 네 배바사 차그로 안두시네 네 엠바 두시네 냠네 제바네 소소기 게셔펴다 냠네 제데 야가 용거리에서 그래
Like the carcass of a wild animal, hide yourself away in the forest. An animal, when they are ill and they realize that this life is ending, they tend to remove themselves from their group, from their community, and they also retreat into solitude to die. And therefore, we very seldom come across a carcass of a wild animal that has died a natural death, because they go somewhere where they are alone and they die. We should take inspiration from this as an illustration that we too should retreat. But what we need to particularly now retreat from is the objects that cause us so much attachment, the objects that cause us so much distraction. See what's dominating your mental thought process, and there where it's harmful, retreat your mind away from those objects. And we do so with the motivation to aid our training so that we can have a more concentrated, focused mind and concentrate then on developing the minds of the Dharma within.
Chakpa meba never jasi. Jizan rangi susu lu ne yembal pa duche chadang yu tonya mesala dus tyobayna ndushin chakpa makiwa yungor. Jizan chakpa makiwa. Chakpa kyebayna chakpa di kienji de. Odu bena nga zuki jiki chakpa kya odi yakudu se na gedi na temoro shina temo chita na di yakudu sama na gedi na di tanyam tuwa. Temoro shina di gedi na oda temo de be yakudu se temo de tanyam tuwa. Ani di jiki yu kari na dene ke chakpa kya na di yu di di chol pa tang yu sem di chol tang di nga zu lu le rawa yo ma den lu di chol dugo ro ba jasa dene yenza dene ki ne yenpa la dyoba na yu thwaya ke shira yungu ma re nam chua goya shira yo ma jasa chata kiya di chata kiya di nyun cha ke res di me du so so ke ke chua nyam len cha de ya go yungu re jasa chapa me ba ne bar cha sa ne yenpa la dyoba na dus chin yungu re si ro
Need to retreat from the objects of our attachment, because we have so many opportunities, new things to try, things that we've enjoyed before to try again, and in this way our mind is so drawn back to a new sporting event or to the next episode on television. This is just our habitual way of thinking, and because of this habitual way of thinking, being drawn to something we see as pleasurable, then our body and our mind follow in this direction. So much of our life is consumed in this way. To the extent that we recognize the importance of developing the minds of the Dharma within us, we retreat to isolation. And in particular in isolation, when solitude that is being presented here, when one imagines oneself isolated in nature, there's nothing much that's new to see. There's nothing much that's new to hear. Quite soon, one will become very familiar with one's environment. The sounds and the sights will be no different today from yesterday. Then one can focus in a less distracted way on our internal process and our mental development.
다니 다기 고야이스 소소 디나 찍나 요말 ngela gore 제상 소소라나 소소랑게 잘레스 소소라나 소소랑 강한 르교에기 고행레스 송거라 지사 삼나 신바이나 안 소소라나디 소소라는 동안 르교에기 고행 고행레 대기주에기 로직인데스 소소 삼나 마신바이나 소소리아 강아데hen 소소리아 강아 동안 녀주에도 소소라 차고래 제로 지사 대대자 소소라게 잘해 소소라나 고해레 시디 삼로 약보 따와시베나 소소라나 고해레 동알이 교관이 최고레스 삼로 약보 따마시베나 소소라나 동안나를 주겐죠 동안나를 받던 거레 소소라 딴 거레스 제가 대해서 저 소소 삼로 따나라 라리 거레스 송거와 어디
There's an applicable quotation from the Buddha here. We are each our own worst enemy. We are also each our own best friend. The meaning of this is, it really is up to us how we live our life. Because whilst there may be many things we feel we don't have so much control over or have a choice in, our mental process, there we have the choice over how much effort and how vigilant we are in training our mind. It is up to us to use conscientiousness, introspection, and mindfulness. It's up to us to be our best friend, and no matter what our activities are, to keep our mind virtuous. And whatever our activities are, to judge whether those are activities to continue to engage in or not. But whatever we're doing, it's up to us if we are our own best friend or not. In other words, if we're using that as an opportunity to train our mind or not.
제가 소수기 소설이야 대기 용야다 대기 용야다 동아세야디 소수기 삼로 야고 땅위 토네 야고 땅신 바이나 대이 토네 소수 대기 주투게 강아세 투고래 제인사 소설하나 관제에서 올다 가스는 소설아 동아세야다 대기 주게게 로지게네 관바래 제일 관례죠 소수다 삼로 야고 땅 마신 바이나 배지 차바 차당 기바이나 차당 기네 삼로디 차당 게 원도 소바이나 디기 견체네 소설이야 동아 모빌리게레스 제가 소설 강한나 추기레스 제가 디 소설 강한나 베네르와 소설하게 차당기 원게 셴야 베지게 즉습제 셴게 잘라고마 잡 셴야 베네 녀와 니동 따야다 셴 수점 소줘야다 디니 제바나 니군노 삼로디 셴레 뇌베 삼바다 셴레 체외 삼바디기 디 견체나 류가게 줘바 디테마르와 제가 디 소소에게 제바로 받아 소소에게 삼로 콜로 봐 셴다게 제요 말도 소소에게 삼로 콜 디주와 다 되는 게 콜로 디기 셴레 뇌바 몸부 제도 디기 가르치거든 되네 년도에 소소라 주의제 소소레 녀바 따야다 소소 전간나 루야데 차로 쓰기로와 제가 소소 전간나 루야데 년도 받다 침내 당고된 조 자위 소소에게 노트 제바자 디루고로 제가 대 소소스 자야인세 소소나 전간 나다한데 소소하라로 차되겠지 자고로 제가 당예다게 자야인세디 돈나디시고로 지난 제한리에 판별 삼바제 잠바다 제와다 인지고 냠는지 내내 삼로 되지요바나 디게 삼로 디게 제한리에 앞에 랑래 앞에 네 랑래 되고 아니 그지는 냠내 야야로도 딘 동안 충충하다 디게 마마 두고 되네자 다니 소스라 고엔레스 어두 숨고로와
If we know how to think skillfully, then we are being our own best friend. But if we don't know how to think skillfully, we will continue to go in directions that cause unhappiness. We'll continue to have our mind go in directions and our body and speech follow in directions that cause unhappiness. Where we are experiencing problems and difficulties in our life, we need to look at our mind and see what we can do about that situation, how we can skillfully transform that situation. Because if we continue to just follow a natural tendency that perhaps is in an unwholesome direction, this is where we end up in conflict with others, where we end up engaging in activity that brings harm to others. In fact, if we take this too far and we end up in trouble with the law, we will be in this suffering situation because of choices we made or did not make. So we need to be aware of our thought process, be aware of the results that follow from this thought process, see how we are in particular circumstances, and see, is our mind at ease and at peace? Is this aiding my spiritual development? Or am I getting frustrated and annoyed? Am I getting full of attachments and desire? Am I getting caught up in the situation? Am my mind unhappy? Do I have to be here? And if I do, can I think about this in a different way? So again, we have a choice in how we think. It takes a lot of effort over a sustained period to transform habit patterns. But this is something we all have the potential to do. And to the extent that we increase the strength and the frequency of virtuous, wholesome ways of thinking, our mind will be happier, more peaceful and at ease. And we'll have an ever greater impact on all those we encounter.
Da do idem denja sense di karelana di nyele di ke sungorwa da chita lunga yusum yukane shana nyoba chigme sembe samlo damja di tembu che dio gore se tembu che gore ani shen ya ani chige jamba da zhe xianzum zhe them je diawa de dena samba da xianzum je dunga da dana nyen bi ke samlo de ni gi ti pa ya ne ya do denje samlo tembu che gore se chisa da ga je le shen le jamba da nin je dang ani chige nga zugi che kan na wa na xin na yu de ne na wa na xin ji zao gi ne yo ma re san bi sam lo de pa dam ja tem bu che je ho re sin ba gabriel sam ma ta ba na ani de yong go ma re che ji na da de ni gi sam lo di nga zugi sam lo ya ga di nga sam ba tem bu dam ja tem bu che ngi di nyam nen tap ji yin san bi dam ja tem bu che ne je ho re de dam ja tem bu che ba na mu thi xiang zu nyam le ya ya zu hu re ji za de ne xian le ne ba ji me san bi sam dam ja tem bu ho re tem me na gabriel ma sam ma ta ba na ne ba che ge cha ru hu re de ne za nga zugi ge wi ja ho zu bi di tem bu ji mu thi xie an je hua de ge xin bu re sung go re.
Always remain firm in your commitment. And this is a crucial point. To the extent that we make a firm commitment, a strong promise to ourselves, we will be able to speed our spiritual development. If our desire to change is not firm, if our desire to turn away from afflicted ways of thinking is not firm, we'll continue to do what comes easily to us rather than do what is right in those circumstances. To the extent that we can develop a firm commitment not to harm others, with that strength of mind, we'll take care of our mind even in difficult situations, ensuring that our mind does not become afflicted and harsh towards others, for example. To the extent that we make the firm commitment to develop love and compassion towards others, then in all circumstances, again, including the difficult ones, we will relate to others with respect for their good qualities, appreciation for the kindness that they have shown us, and we'll be able to more readily give rise to love and compassion. But it's important that our commitment is stable, because if it's not, we'll continue to do what's easy rather than do what is right.
Alright, that's okay. Diringi, that's okay. Lobsang Dorje kasan chibare, that delia chike sosugi, chik minyembe kasore, that dondal tik la karususne, chaktan jegi yudike tongyodin, lamsan delia, and jo that ngas lola nawan hashinchik. Rang trupte ba che zawa ki yo marta sambige deni bene tubi gyuma na she sam ta ya ta ane deni ge an ji ge ma ju ge gidi ne chakdan ge ge ngan zu de lo jang yue ga ba sa chakdan ge ge yu da tong ya da deni ge go ya ru chi na des pa de sil ya de sap che che ko ne yen ba che ta ko sa 네 엠발 마디오베나 디네기 마야이 마토야기다 안지 마고야기 탑시를 배시다야디 안게체 모레스 안 게시 소설이야 제강 앞에 즉 탑시 제제 탑시 균에게 매되겐 강아를 채봐 있나 안델이야 디 겨왕함에 얘기 되고래 삼당고레스마도 델레베 즉 데노 즉 삼나 강아 삼망보다는 이목차에 있는가요 네자 데데 어디디 겨왕함에 얘기 되고 겨왕함에 규사 사와 디기 되고 두고 어디 델레야 탑시 삼당마다스가요 말해서 비게 도시는 레레 따고 얘기 되고 민주고래 네 야구로 와서 나대가 오셔야지 민바네 네 제마 누가 질미네 디레 깔레샤 깔레 가용 거래 제가 리티브 민구도 디고도 선비게 언두스네 제마나가 요야메 바강아디 메바 차로 그래서 비게 도삼당 거래에서 이제 자당하는 저기 시안라 네베 삼바당 시안자 내가 자당 차도서 유니기메 선배 삼로디 담자디 일이야 그디나 삼다 템보체 거래에서 시안라 펜베 자와다 잠바다 니제다 시안라 펜베 자 강투 지기 선비게 게웨 자와라 강투도 쩐기 선배 삼로디 담자디 일이야 템보체 무투체 그디나 디스 템보체 네 거래에서 언두 삼당 거래에서 다디리 저게 강저게 럽찬디게 삼다야데 디레도와 안데 뇽원 잡라딘마 안 모티체 쉬야지.
And to summarize what we've looked at this morning, at all times be aware of your mental process, utilize introspection, mindfulness, conscientiousness, and through utilizing those three, when one notices an object of attachment arising, either something one sees or hears or something one is recalling or thinking about in the future, as soon as one notices that, immediately remind yourself that it doesn't exist in the way that it appears, that it's actually like an illusion or an apparition, an echo, and therefore it is not suitable to be attached to something that is like an illusion. It's not suitable to be angry at speech which is no different from an echo. Moreover, develop a strong commitment to turn away from the afflictions, that when one notices them arise, to not allow them to abide, and rather to generate their antidotes. So if one notices one's mind is criticizing, complaining, rather think about the qualities of others, generate respect for them, appreciate the kindness they've shown us and others, and generate love and compassion. The wish, may they be happy, may they be free of all their faults, may they abide in lasting happiness. And this is important to do, because if we keep our mind on the positive side rather than the negative side, our mind is less likely to become depressed or dispirited. Moreover, our heart will be open and receptive to others, and be more likely to have a positive impact on them. Furthermore, with our mind being happier, we'll have more mental energy and mental space to strive in our spiritual development. And here, I encourage you to rejoice in your endeavors, rejoice in your spiritual training, rejoice in the meditations you do, the teachings you receive, the Dharma books you read, rejoice in what you're doing, recognize the good that you are doing in terms of your spiritual development, and use this to commit to continue to spiritually develop. And in this way, one develops the strength of mind required to bring about a complete transformation. And moreover, when one sees objects of attachments and anger and so forth arising, isolate your mind. So not everyone lives in the wilderness, but live as if one does, in the sense that when the objects of attachment and anger arise, isolate your mind from them, as if one were living in isolation. Turn your mind from those objects of attachment and anger, and turn your mind to virtue, as if one were living a life in retreat. And moreover, with this, aspire to do so in the future. So use all these skillful techniques to keep the mind virtuous, to add strength and commitment. And then it will become ever easier to turn away from afflictions such as pride, attachment, jealousy and anger. And keep our mind virtuous on love and compassion and wisdom. So we'll conclude here then for this morning and continue from the same place this afternoon. Thank you very much.